Okay, so here we are, Creative Nonfiction Week 4. We're going to talk about stylistic choices that you can make to sound more natural. So we'll talk about word choice, showing versus telling, and brevity. So word choice I was talking about before. Sometimes it's called diction, like the dictionary. It means finding the best word for the situation. Coming from another language, this could be kind of difficult because you may have a word that is cognate with English, but it means something different, or it's not in the same register. So when you're looking for word choice, you want to see if there's a specific phrase a word is always used in, a specific situation. Is it a literary word? Is it a simple word? A vulgar word? Is it a word everyone says? Is it a word old people say? What is it? And find something analogous. There are a few ways to do it to find this example. One of them is to use Google. Type in your word or your word in a phrase, see what comes up the most. Use these dictionaries like Abilingvo or Multitron. They have a lot of definitions of words, hundreds of definitions for a single word, a lot of examples in a sentence. This can really help to see if you're using the right word. Again, look for examples of your word in a sentence. So if you're using a word you're not sure how it's used, Google it, and then see if it's used in the same context. And don't assume that one phrase or saying translates directly into English. Sometimes we do have similar phrases, sometimes they're exactly the same, but you want to see if something is a set phrase that doesn't change. You want to see exactly what we say. Find it on the internet and copy it, because it doesn't sound right if you're almost saying a set phrase. It sounds really funny. Alright, so next we'll talk about brevity and showing and not telling. So brevity is generally pretty straightforward. Being brief, saying as much as you can with as little as you can, as few words as possible. And showing and not telling is about giving examples rather than explaining with adjectives. So try to avoid redundancy, repeating. Don't say the same thing twice, She was so bored and everything seemed uninteresting. You don't need to say the second part. We already know she's bored, so why tell us that everything seemed uninteresting? The next is using short, concise words when you do not need big ones. I wanted to surrender versus I wanted to give up. Surrender is a military term. It's a little more formal than give up, but there's no reason to use it unless you're trying to evoke this formal or military tone. It's okay to use short words that are simple if they're the best words, using examples to convey a feeling, thought, or image whenever it's possible. It's usually more effective. So, for example, he was 20, he was angry and hit a wall with a ton of force. Or you could say he hit the wall so hard there's still a dent in it 20 years later. I think the second sentence, even though it's saying the same thing, by forming the thought as an example, it leaves a much stronger impression. It tells you a lot more about the psychology of this person. It gives you a sense of setting and feel where they are. They're standing next to a wall that has a dent in it. And we also don't know what a ton of force is exactly, but I think you can estimate how hard you have to hit a wall in order to leave a dent. So giving the example is much more specific. It gives you a lot more information. Another example, they knew each other well for over 40 years and were supportive, or they saw each other daily through 3 wars and 1 famine. A little more intense, but by using the examples of the wars, you learn a lot more about these people, especially if you had like a specific war that we all know that could give you even more information. But you can see the 2 sentences are the same length, and I think the second one is much more effective and tells you a lot more about the characters. Finally, clarity. Be clear. Remember, when you're writing literary writing, the reader is not in your head, and they're not in the head of the people that you're documenting. You need to tell the reader everything. for example, a number of people described themselves as being bored or frustrated with something about their lives, and sometimes it wasn't clear. This is in the profiles. I didn't know what the people were frustrated about or bored about. One person looked at their laptop computer and they were very upset or disgusted or something, and I thought that was great. Like, being disgusted at your laptop is a really interesting thing, but I didn't know why, because it wasn't said. I kind of had some guesses, but being really specific and clear will really help. And I think that you always have to remember that your reader doesn't know about you yet. If you wrote a whole book, by page 200, the reader knows the characters. Yeah, you can leave some things out, but you have to remember the reader's never met your character or you. They need all the information. Anything that you assume that they can understand might not be clear, and you should spell it out. And then there's also cultural differences is similar. We here have things that are quite different in ways that are subtle and you don't think about. But in one person's profile, the police came to their house and checked their documents to see if they were registered in the right place, and they weren't, and they promised to fix their documents. And this, I lived in Russia, so I know what that's about. I know that there's this tension of you could be kicked out of your house and sent to another city. You could get in trouble. You might have to bribe somebody or something. I don't know. But another American reader does no idea what you're talking about. We don't have registrations for where we live. We are allowed to just move to any city whenever we want. We don't have to carry identifying documents all the time. The police don't have the right to just ask to see our documents without a reason. So that would need to be spelled out, and especially when you're writing in English about your native country, you need to think about what things does somebody from a foreign land not know. I know what the Moscow subway is like because I've been on it in rush hour, but somebody who's never been in any subway doesn't know. Somebody who's been in a small subway doesn't know. You know, you have to make things a little clearer, and you do it by using examples. You know, rather than saying, I hate the crowded Moscow train, you can say, I hate the crowded Moscow train, where anywhere you're standing, you're touching a minimum of 6 other people, just because we're so packed together. This really explains it to somebody who doesn't know. So when you're talking about a cultural thing, imagine that you're an alien looking down on us from Mars, onto your hometown. What do you see? What do you not understand? How would you explain things to an alien? Remember that the reader doesn't know not just your place that you are, but your history, your psychology. You need to explain everything. And you don't want to be redundant when you do it, but if you use a lot of specific, concise examples, you can really give a lot of information in a short time. Alright, so we'll start with the next video about creating voice, so I'll see you in a minute.